There was no reason for us to keep voting, keep allowing these speeches that just degraded and diminished and insulted Kevin McCarthy. We didn't have to keep doing that.
Oh, it was so uncomfortable. We argued and we fought. It was so icky. Joining me now, my friend Josh Hammer of the Josh Hammer Show, also opinion editor at Newsweek. Josh, why all the fighting? It's only America.
Jesse, Happy New Year. Good to see you again. Jesse, thank you personally as well for being one of the relatively few sane conservative talking heads who actually got this one right. What is wrong? Like, seriously, what is wrong with the people on our proverbial side, especially in kind of the legacy kind of corporate right of center media, who just had meltdown after meltdown about these infidels, these rebels, these terrorists? What is the plan? Who is this speaker? Guys, what is wrong with a few days of deliberating to make sure that the living, breathing embodiment of K Street corrupt republicanism, which is Kevin McCarthy, that is always who Kevin McCarthy has been since the day that he ascended to the U.S. House from Bakersfield, California, what is wrong with a few days of deliberating to make sure that he becomes a very weak speaker and is able to then concede or is able to grant concessions to conservative firebrands like our mutual friend Chip Roy and so forth? There's nothing wrong with that. There is literally nothing wrong with that. And what I would personally like to see, Jesse, I would personally like to see if those folks who since day one, since before the first ballot in the House was even cast, were going to the mattresses to excoriate all of McCarthy's detractors who were trying to kind of bolster his chances. I would like to hear those commentators now say whether or not they support the concessions. Do they support the fact that 3 House Freedom Caucus members will now be on the very influential House Rules Committee? Do they support the fact that there will be now 12 individual appropriations packages as opposed to one gargantuan, grotesque $1.7 to $2 trillion, whatever, omnibus bill? A modicum of intellectual honesty, I think, at this particular moment would be appreciated. So I'm kind of fed up with it, to be honest with you. It was a very eye-opening week, I thought.
Okay, Josh, I actually want to ask you a very important question. In my opinion, it's generally the most important question. Why? And this is what I mean. Now, I have my own theory on why, but okay, politicians are weenies. That sucks. But so many of these people who spent the last week yelling about a 3 or 4 day argument on the House floor are people I grew up reading, I grew up following, I grew up watching on television, I grew up listening to the radio show, grew up always considered them being on our side and freedom fighters. And I'm not hesitant to say I've learned a lot from them. And yet at the first sign of a little tiff, they all couldn't lay down fast enough. Why?
Jesse, it's an unpleasant question to ask, but it's a question that has to be asked. Look, I mean, I have read multiple of Mark Levin's books. I mean, I think Mark Levin's Liberty and Tyranny, which is kind of his Tea Party era manifesto, I think he published that book around 2009 or so. That book was very influential. I remember reading it when I was in college. I was in college at the time. I mean, I've read multiple of Mark's books, actually. And, Mark is not the only one. I'm not trying to kind of cast fingers solely on him. There were really a galling number of very prominent right of center commentators in the radio space and the columnist space. And I guess the only obvious answer that comes to mind, Jesse, and I'm just speculating here, I don't pretend to know this, but the answer that comes to mind is just access and influence. You kind of have to assume that Kevin McCarthy personally and his closest allies, his chief of staff, his closest deputies and whips in the House Republican caucus probably called up a lot of these folks and said, if you do this, then, we will kind of value your opinion on this bill. I'm just speculating here. I have no inside knowledge of how this kind of thing goes down whatsoever. I would like to think that I personally am not compromised like this when it comes to my calling the shots in the commentariat space. But I have to think that kind of access and ability to possibly kind of shape legislation or shape the governance of the chamber, the U.S. House, is probably what's going on here.
Yeah, boy, maybe it's just that simple. I don't know, Josh, it's weird. Maybe they lost my number. I didn't get any of those phone calls. All right, now, Kevin McCarthy, what kind of power does he have? You mentioned that he's very, very restricted, effectively neutered by a lot of this. Okay, what should we be watching out for? Because you're going to have to forgive me if I don't trust him.
No, nor should you trust him. I mean, Look, Kevin McCarthy, like I just said, I mean, he is who he is, and he's the same man that he has been since he got to the U.S. House. There is one thing and one thing only that Kevin McCarthy has always cared about, and it is Kevin McCarthy's own power. It is his own career advancement. It is his own kind of climbing through the ranks. And he is willing to go to any measure to do so. He is K Street's favorite Republican because he is infamously chummy with right-of-center lobbyists. He is corrupted by various domestic and foreign interests because Kevin McCarthy is all about the quid pro quo. I'll trade you X for Y, the compromise kind of game. He's a big proponent of manufacturing crises. He loves these kind of 1.7 trillion last-minute omnibus foist down the throats of the members style of governance there. So these concessions that, Chip Roy and the merry bands of quote unquote terrorists, the concessions that they were able to extract include, from my perspective, crucially, a single member motion to vacate, which of course means that any single member of the U.S. House can actually force a full vote to vacate the speaker's chair. And, I saw Chip give an interview to one of the Sunday shows. I guess it was this past weekend. I don't remember. I think it was CNN. I can't remember which Sunday show it was. And they basically asked him, do you plan to stand on guard to potentially use this single member motion to vacate? And he kind of, he didn't give a very straight answer, but he pretty clearly said yes. So I think Chip and a handful of others are going to be kind of watching Kevin McCarthy like a hawk now. But one thing that stands out in particular that I'm very excited about is the fact that they were able to get a guarantee that there will be these 12 individual appropriations bills. So if you take that seriously, these are the 12 bills that fund the government every fiscal year, year in and year out. That is a huge, huge win for fiscal sanity. I mean, the fact that we will not have to face hopefully not to face these gargantuan last-minute omnibus $2 trillion or the government shuts down situation there. But again, the fail-safe mechanism is this motion to vacate, and it's just very, very, very good for conservatives that they were able to extract that.
Who is Kevin McCarthy, Josh? Now, obviously, everyone knows who he is now, and I know you've known who he is for a long time, but the average Joe generally doesn't. You mentioned Bakersfield, California. You mentioned he's chummy with lobbyists. Now, he did stand against, loudly, publicly stood against that $1.7 trillion omnibus bill. Is this guy Mitch McConnell light? Is he better? Is he the Antichrist? Who is he?
Look, Kevin McCarthy is a career politician. I mean, he was in the California state legislature before he went to the U.S. House. Kevin McCarthy also went on the cover of a book along with Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor, who, of course, have since left the House. The three of them kind of were the very kind of public-facing portion of this Young Guns program that the Republican Party, around the time of the Tea Party era, 2010, 2011 or so, they're really trying to kind of promote this. They were supposed to be kind of the young, up-and-coming face of the Republican Party. But again, the problem that so many of us who are kind of conviction conservatives, who are kind of ideologically motivated conservatives, the same problem that all of us have with Kevin McCarthy is that no one is able to discern what his putative principles are. Now, he kind of unveiled this commitment for America during this past campaign cycle. It seemed to me like he wasn't necessarily particularly eager to unveil it. His hand was kind of forced by a lot of people who were kind of saying, what's the plan? What's the plan? Other than the most kind of like mealy-mouthed milquetoast of all Republican policies, like cutting taxes, like boosting domestic energy production, I'm sure Kevin McCarthy supports that. But other than that kind of 1980s style pablum, I'm really just not entirely sure what Kevin McCarthy stands for. Because again, he's not a conviction politician. He is a pure kind of power for me, woe to thee style politician. That's really who he is to his core.